Hello everyone, my name is Cameron Cowan. I am regularly host of the Cameron Cowan Show every Monday and Friday on YouTube. This is my special series of videos on the U.S. Constitution. Now, if you're watching this video, you're actually in the middle of the series. Now, this is my signature video on the Electoral College. However, I have done a whole bunch of other videos on the amendments, the basic framework, the Federalist Papers, and other important foundational things that I've kind of been building on. So if you haven't watched those videos, I highly recommend them. They're in a playlist on the channel. Please do watch. They're all vitally important. Now, the Electoral College is something that, especially in 2012, has been kind of under fire. There are dozens of videos lambasting the institution, supporting the institution. This is one of those that is supporting the institution. So if you hate the Electoral College and you want to change your mind, keep watching. If you don't want to change your mind and you're convinced it's bad, then this might not be the video for you. Because there's lots of reasons why the Electoral College is an excellent and wonderful institution for a country as large and diverse as ours. And I'm going to kind of explain why. The Electoral College basically prevents a simple majority of people, just sheer population, from taking over the whole country and running all the policies. Now consider this. In a map of the United States, in each state, there are some states that are radically more populous than others. For instance, California is far more populous than, say, Iowa. Texas more than Wyoming, and Florida than New Hampshire. Now, under a purely direct population system, a state like Florida, Texas, and California could all get together and, by simple sheer numbers, decide who's president without any say from the rest of the country. However, thanks to the Electoral College, that's not allowed, because the population effect is accounted for but muted. And the reason that works is endemic to how the Electoral College works. The Electoral College is made up of a minimum of 3, but usually more, electors from each state based upon how many seats they have in the House of Representatives and their 2 senators. So, for example, my home state of Colorado has 9. Colorado has 2 senators and 7 representatives. Now, and every state has their number based upon their senators and their congressional districts, and that looks something like this. Now, the interesting thing about all of that is that in the original framework, the southern states had much more kind of direct population, the northern states had more physical voting population than the southern states did. But the southern states had more representatives because they used the slaves as part of representation with the 3/5 compromise. If you want to learn about that, go watch the 3/5 compromise video. I highly recommend. And so the North would have been able to outvote the South, but if it was by representation, they could have outvote the North. This is all very confusing. So by making sure that each state had a equal chance based upon their population to be heard, and for the president to be chosen by the Electoral College choosing, gave each state a chance to be fairly represented and for presidential candidates to pay attention to the concerns in each state and try to fairly understand those things in Congress. Now, obviously, in a more leadership role presidential thing that we've had in the 20th century, this has been more important. In the 19th century, this was somewhat more muted. It had more to do with how certain laws were being enforced, foreign trade, all this sort of thing. But either way, it kind of gave everyone a more fair seat at the table, rather than being able to sit in maybe New York, LA, and Miami and being able to win a presidential election without having to listen to someone in Kansas City, let's say. Now, a lot of people would say whoever gets the most votes should win. That's very simple. But the fact of the matter is there are lots of chances in history where that wasn't the case, and I think people would have much rather had that outcome. For example, in 1992, Bill Clinton did not win a majority of the vote. He just won a majority of the Electoral College. Of the seats needed is 212 votes in the Electoral College to win. He won in the right places, rather than making sure the most people voted for him. In a similar fashion, you can have the most people vote for you and not win. An example of that to some greater or lesser degree is Al Gore in 2000. He had the popular vote, but was unable to win in Florida with its, I believe, 29 electoral votes. So now a lot of people would say, well, that's not fair. That's obviously who we want for president. And I'm like, no, that's who some people want for president. That doesn't necessarily mean that's who everyone wants. And the Electoral College mutes this effect. Now, the Electoral College, the states have the right to determine how those electors vote in the Electoral College. The tradition was, and this is now embodied by law in many states, the electors of the Electoral College vote in the manner in which their people voted. So if your state voted for President Obama over Mitt Romney in 2012, then your state's electors vote for that person. Similarly, if your state voted for Mitt Romney, then your electors go to Mitt Romney. There are a handful of states that vote split in terms of the electors are divided depending on how well the candidates did in their in their respective states. There are 13 states that do it that way. Most states, it's a winner-take-all strategy, which makes their electors a bit more valuable. Now the issue is, for some people, the concern is that there are plenty of states where the electors are not bound by law. They are asked, and they usually go along with it, but are not bound by law to vote for the person the people voted for. And this can sometimes cause lawsuits. Now, I am certainly in favor of electors voting the way that people voted. I think that should be embodied in law for certain, and that is up to the states, so that is the state responsibility to do that. But overall, the institution of the Electoral College makes sure that voices from Wyoming, that only has 3 electors, to California, with its, I believe, 45, are heard and understood as much as anybody else's. And this is vitally important, because if you had a simple majority, you could considering how few people vote in this country, you could win the presidency and not have to really go to that many places or listen to that many people, or even take in that many ideas. You could literally sit in California and just be able to do it with a sheer force of people, because not enough people vote. One of the big concerns of the Founding Fathers was a protection of rights, property, and particularly minority rights. We talked about this in Federalist 10, 14, and 51. And the Electoral College is an example of making sure that certain rights of both the majority and minority are protected, and making sure that we are not subject to majority rule. Although majority rule seems good in principle, majority rule also is very dangerous if a violent passion kind of takes people up, as sometimes occurs. Look at Black Lives Matter protesters in Ferguson. Very dangerous things can happen. Our system is made to moderate those effects. Not eliminate them entirely, but to kind of moderate and mute those effects by dividing power, dividing control, and making sure that all voices are heard so that the system can work ostensibly for everyone. Again, this is under ideal scenarios. If we want to talk about how things actually work, we watch the talk show. I talk about it all the time. But this is how things are ideally supposed to work. And that is why the Electoral College, in my mind, is the most important tool in our election system, because it makes sure that when it comes to electing the President of the United States, which in the 21st century is a very important office that sets the agenda for a variety of things, that all voices are heard. So, I'm sure you'll have some comments for me. I certainly appreciate them. I am absolutely going to post my lovely story from Vox that I consulted when I was working on this, and it talks about the very important election of 1800 and how we used to elect president and vice president. It used to be that you voted whoever got the most votes as president and whoever got the next most votes as vice president, which would oftentimes lead to a split party administration. They changed this in 1804 after the election of 1800 because there was plotting and planning to change this, because the original Constitution was not planned for parties. And when I get into elections and winner take all and all this type of thing, I'll talk more about that. But it's a really fascinating case. There was a wonderful book called 1800 that is definitely worth reading, and it goes through the politics of the election of 1800. The new Broadway musical Hamilton kind of does a satirical joke about the election of 1800, and it's just a fascinating case of how even in the early days, when many of the founders were still alive, they were still working out some quirky things about our Constitution. So fortunately now we vote electors for president and vice president together on one ticket. So that kind of quirky thing has been fixed. But it's very fascinating, so I will definitely post it with this video in the description below. And so if you have questions, concerns, rants, comments, whatever have you, feel free to comment. I know you do. Feel free to email me, email@CameronCowan.net, at Cameron Cowan on Twitter, Facebook.com/The Cameron Cowan Show, and we'll see you next time in the next video on the Constitution. Talk soon now. Bye-bye.